In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Paul explains to the Romans that all people have different gifts. Thus we are not to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to think. In other words, one person's gift does not make that person superior to another who has a different gift. Notice that Paul lists among the gifts things like diligence and generosity, and even cheerfulness. So if you are a bit of an Eeyore, that's not a character flaw. You just have different gifts. You've heard me speak many times about the variety of gifts, but it occurred to me that I have not really explained why I think seeing ourselves and our sisters and our brothers in terms of gifts is so significant. First, it's important to realize that poor character is not the result of lacking gifts. Poor character results from how we apply or fail to apply the gifts that we have. It's not a lack, but a misapplication of our energies. Are we greedy and power-hungry, manipulative and self-involved, slothful and self-indulgent? Or do we share our gifts for the benefit of the world around us? Some use their gifts solely for themselves, as we know, and even disparage those who do not do the same. Others see themselves as a meaningful part of a larger plan. When we do not understand that people are differently gifted, we feel we must, each one of us, be capable of everything. We measure ourselves against the sum total of all possible gifts and find ourselves lacking, rather than seeing ourselves in terms of how we apply the gifts that we have. Rather than seeing life as a blessing, an opportunity granted us by God, it becomes a burden in which we feel inadequate, imperfect, inferior. We look at the gifts of others, realize that we lack them, and instead of rejoicing in how we can work together, imagine that there is some fault in ourselves. Rather than cooperating, in other words, we slink away with a feeling of defeat. Instead of feeling blessed with a gift that makes us a meaningful member of a community, we feel isolated and without purpose. We think we are only as good as our most recent successors, the benefit of which quickly fades. Over and again, we must prove our value, and the more we self-promote the skills we actually lack, the more our actual skills remain unused. We forget that we are able to achieve our greatest potential only when we are working together with others. It's only then that we are free to be fully ourselves. A wheel is useless without an axle, and axle is useless without a universal joint. Speaking of self-promotion, I'm stunned at how effective it is. I've noticed, for example, that when conducting job interviews with teams, the more candidates promote themselves, the more people tend to believe them. This contradicts my own experience, which is that the more someone self-promotes, the less substance there is behind it. I suspect that churches fall into the hiring trap because when calling a new rector, they tend to look for Jesus Christ with a British accent. In other words, they want someone who can do everything, even though such a person does not exist. And when someone comes along claiming to be able to do everything, they think, this is the one. Instead, they should seek what new relationship God is calling them to. I'm not saying that it's wrong to claim our gifts. On the contrary, I think it's necessary for us to recognize and claim our gifts if we are to offer them for communal use. There's a difference between claiming one's specific gifts and claiming that one is superior to everyone. Perhaps people are susceptible to self-promotion because of social influence. In contrast with what Paul writes to the Romans, capitalism holds that the more common the gift, the less valuable it is. Now, although capitalism and Christianity are not the same thing, Saying this seems to upset not a few people. In contrast with capitalism, Christianity says that all gifts are valuable, needed, some in greater quantity than others, if society is to work well. Recent events, in fact, reveal that many of the lowest paid workers are essential to the well-being of the whole. People therefore should be valued for their gifts and respected for their contribution to the whole. As the president of the Carnegie Corporation, John Gardner, said, "The society which scorns excellence in plumbing as a humble activity and tolerates shoddiness in philosophy because it is an exalted activity will have neither good plumbing nor good philosophy. Neither its pipes nor its theories will hold water." Likewise, a community in which everyone has the same gifts will not function well. When I was in seminary, it was common for people to talk about working on one's growing edge. I suspect that originally this was a way to encourage people to keep growing, to keep identifying and applying their gifts, but somehow it got warped into focusing on the skills that we lack. In other words, people identified the gifts that they did not have and then spent time trying to develop them, when they should have identified the gifts that they did have and then sought ways to apply them. We need to identify the skills that we lack also, but not so that we can develop them, but so that we can find people with whom to work together. God has created the world so that we have what we need to thrive, but we must learn how to use it in cooperation with others. Our gifts bring us together.